This is Reaganism, a podcast dedicated to exploring where the Reagan movement lives today. I'm Roger Zakheim, your host, director of the Ronald Reagan Institute in Washington, D.C.
On this episode of Reaganism, Roger is joined by national security and Middle East expert Dr. Michael Doran, who serves as the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at Hudson Institute. They discuss the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, the hostage crisis, which resulted in the death of an American citizen, and Iran's role as a funder and organizer of terrorism and discord throughout the Middle East.
Dr. Michael Doran, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we had a chance to be together at a conference not too long ago out at Pepperdine University, where had a chance to interact a bit and discuss American foreign policy, national security, and the Middle East. And given everything that's going on, excited to have you with us. Of course, you're not too far from the Reagan Institute down on Pennsylvania Avenue with the Hudson Institute. And you come at this being a real expert in Arab-Israel relations and U.S. national security strategy, having served in the State Department, of course, also in the Pentagon as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. I guess we'll just jump right into it, Mike, and talk about the tragic news came out over the weekend in Israel, where after 330 days in captivity, Hamas murdered 6 hostages. One was Hirsch Goldberg Poland, an American-Israeli citizen, and I say murdered. I mean, it was a assassination, just the worst kind. Big protests in Israel followed, lots of discussion, scrutiny over Prime Minister Netanyahu's handling and whether there was a missed opportunity to negotiate a deal. Give us your take, just how you're thinking about that tragedy, the loss of these hostages, and the situation on the ground in Israel right now.
Sure. Well, first of all, one's heart goes out to the families. I really can't imagine how excruciating it would be to receive that news, especially after 10 months of torture, basically, just wondering every day what's happening to them. Of course, in Israel, as you mentioned, there have been all these demonstrations, and they come together with the accusation that Prime Minister Netanyahu has sabotaged the hostages for prisoners deal, that there's a ceasefire deal that's there to be had, and that he has rejected it, and that's the significance of all the protests. Now, the key issue that he is insisting on is Israeli control of the Philadelphia corridor. That's the border between Gaza and Egypt, and I have to say that I am very sympathetic to his arguments for holding on to the Philadelphia corridor. I think it's in the Israeli interest, and I think it's very much in the American interest. There's a counter argument. There's a counter argument as to why they could go ahead and relinquish control, at least temporarily. But I'm not convinced by it. I think the reason I think it's a strategic asset both to Israel and to the U.S. is going to determine what's really being argued about in terms of this control of the Philadelphia corridor is will Israel attain its war aims or not? There are 3 major war aims. One is destroying Hamas as a military force, destroying it as a political force capable of ruling Gaza, and returning the hostages. And I don't think that certainly the first 2, and I actually would argue the third as well, but it's debatable for sure. The first 2 are not achievable if Israel relinquishes the Philadelphia corridor, because that's the major artery, economic artery of Gaza, and as long as that is in Hamas's control, then Hamas is just going to spring back.
Yeah, that's a good breakdown, Mike, and certainly on those first 2 war aims. The third war aim is the return of the hostages, of course, is one that seems to be Israelis were most focused on and gets the most traction in terms of people going out to the streets and protesting and have the most, I would say, in Israel, skepticism that Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is doing enough and is committed enough to that third priority as much as priorities 1 and 2. Just disclosure to our viewers and listeners, I've worked with John Poland and Rachel Goldberg, was in Israel on the attacks October 7th, saw them shortly after Hirsch was captured, and it's just devastating, absolutely devastating. And if you watch the funeral and John and Rachel speak, they steered clear of having any direct political statement. It was a moment of, as you'd expect, just deep grieving and emotion. But it was devastating on so many levels, Mike. But one, at least that hit me, was I really expected, perhaps Rachel Goldberg and John Poland were such passionate advocates that got me there, that Hirsch would come home. And flipping that with Hirsch's murder, it made me feel like the plight of the hostages has closed. There are 101 more hostages. I think the people in the press report that perhaps 50 or more are alive. But there was sort of this pall over the whole plight of the hostages, and a feeling with Hirsch's murder along with the other hostages that perhaps they are not coming home. And I think that is, I would expect, contributing to what you're seeing on the streets in Israel, and that third war aim seeming to be the window has closed. Give me your take on that reaction.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that it has completely closed. I definitely wouldn't say that. I think that the use of the hostage issue, there's no, in my mind, there's no doubt that the hostage issue has been politicized from day one, and that the opponents of Netanyahu seized on it as a way of putting pressure on him politically, without any respect to without any reference to the war whatsoever. And I spoke with when I was in Israel in February. I spoke with the mother of a hostage, and I asked her about the hostage groups, and if they received significant emotional support by meeting with the groups, and she said that meeting with them one-on-one is fantastic. Meeting in very small groups of up to 3 or 4 people is good, but beyond that, it begins to become highly politicized. And she wanted to advocate just for the release of her daughter, and didn't want to become a football in any of the in any of the politics. I don't. It's very. It's difficult to talk about this, but it's just a basic reality that if you have half of the population calling on Netanyahu to stop the war today, which has been going on, this didn't happen, didn't start last Friday, right? This has been going on since very early on in the war. If you have half the population calling for that, it's going to give Hamas hope that it can hold out. And that it can get a better deal. And when you have what you have now with the Histadrut, the Labor Federation, and other very significant politicians blaming Netanyahu and calling for a reversal of the decision, you had a full Security Cabinet decision last week to hold on to the Philadelphia corridor, and I was saying reverse that. There's in my mind, there's no way but to say, but to conclude from that Sinwar is going to be rewarded for murdering the hostages, and that logic, to me, as horrible as it is to say to the people who are hoping and praying to see their loved ones come home, that logic to me is incontrovertible.
Well, this is part of the torture of Hamas holding hostages and what it does, and the devastating choices they have to make. I mean, Netanyahu, responding to the protest, said, "I won't surrender to this pressure, or our nation won't surrender to this pressure." And I'm telling Sinwar, forget it. It won't happen. As you note, there are the Histadrut, right? You're calling for the general strike. And it seems to be that Hamas, regardless of how you read the Israeli side of the calculus, the instruction was is that if the IDF were to come in and be in the grips of a hostage rescue, the instruction was now to eliminate the hostages, to murder the hostages. And that's what took place, because we saw a week ago the Bedouin hostage who was rescued by the IDF. Of course, they don't want to give any more wins, not just to Netanyahu, but to Israel. And we saw that, seems to me, tragically play out with Hersh Goldberg, Poland. Let me ask you a different side of this, and the reason why so many of us are focused on Hersh, not only because of just the inspiring advocacy of his parents, John Paul and Rachel Goldberg, but his American-Israeli citizenship set him apart. And one of the things that I've been critical of and question is whether the United States has done enough. President Biden has spoken to Hersh's parents on multiple occasions, did so after it was announced that Hersh had been murdered. He also said in a statement that Hamas will pay a price. And in my mind, I've said this elsewhere, those words ring hollow, that there were 330 days for the President of the United States to step up and put pressure on Hamas to release not only an Israeli citizen, but an American citizen too. Mike, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think of it exactly the same way. Look, one of the things that Hamas is banking on, it's not just the opposition to Netanyahu inside Israel, but it's also banking on American policy as being the restraining force. The United States opposed Israel going in on the ground to begin with. It opposed the entry into Gaza City. It opposed the entry into Khan Yunis. It opposed the entry into Rafah. And all along the way, that opposition has given hope to Hamas that if they hold out long enough, American pressure will come to bear, and that Israel will have to withdraw from Gaza, as it has done in any of the other previous operations that we've had. Again, that is just incontrovertible. There's no other way to read it. The logic here is so simple, and so I think that from the beginning of the war, a lot of the rhetoric coming out of the White House, not all of it, but a lot of it, has blamed the Israelis for the continuation of the war. Listening to some of the press commentary after Friday, over the killing of the hostages last week, you'd think that Netanyahu shot them with his own gun. I mean, it's shocking to me that the entire world should blame Hamas for the murder of those hostages, and it should be blaming Hamas for the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza as well, because it's completely part of its strategy to generate opposition to Israel by having a lot of Palestinian civilians killed and by threatening the Israelis to kill their hostages. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I agree with that, and this is really playing into the tactics of terrorists right here, right? Where their approach of not playing by any moral code, by the laws of armed conflict don't apply to them, but holding their adversaries to do the same, it just plays out over and over again in U.S. policy. I agree with you.
They're using our moral code as a weapon against us. We have to be aware of that.
And it's undermined the Israeli war effort, no doubt. I mean, I think part of the tragedy here was, you've seen people write about this, is of course they were so close to rescuing these hostages underneath Rafah. Our friend Rich Goldberg was tweeting about this immediately after the same Rafah, where, as you just noted, the administration had told Israel not to operate and not to go into. Let's zoom out a little bit. Again, we're with Dr. Michael Doran from the Hudson Institute, expert in the Middle East. Read his stuff. It appears out of the Hudson Institute and elsewhere. Talk about what happened before this latest tragic events over the weekend in terms of Israel's what's being characterized as preemptive strike on Hezbollah. Hezbollah was organized to carry out a significant attack on Israel, nominally in response to Israel's strike on Hezbollah leadership. Israel got there first, seems to have had an intended impact in terms of deterring Hezbollah in two ways. On the one hand, it took out Hezbollah positions in the south of Lebanon, and two, the Hezbollah response seemingly didn't have a material impact on Israel, yet Hassan Nasrallah said, quote, "For now, we consider that the response is over and the country, that is Lebanon, can take a breath." How do you read the events of the past week and organize your thoughts and where it puts kind of Israel's efforts to deter Hezbollah?
I thought it was an exceptionally interesting event. And part of the reason for that is that I still don't think I fully understand what happened.
By the way, that's rare, Mike, in the world of think tankery, to get out there and say you fully don't understand what happened yet. That shows that shows intellectual honesty, rare amongst our colleagues.
Well, I don't know about that, but I don't trust the story that we've been told. I don't think it was fully transparent. Let's say that I'm talking about the Israeli story. Well, the stories, they don't all match up, and I can't.
Well, take us through your thinking. What doesn't add up?
The Israeli messaging on this from the IDF spokesman would have you believe that they watched as Hezbollah fighters were loading rockets onto launchers and took them out in real time. And so they launched, I don't know how many hundred, maybe over 100. I forgot the number already.
There were 100 aircraft in the air. That's what I saw reported. 100 aircraft
in the air to go attack in real time, according to real-time intelligence. I don't believe that story or the impression that was created by what they said. I think Nasrallah the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, and Khamenei, and the Iranian leadership, they were saying for weeks that the blow's coming, and first we were wondering, was it going to be coordinated or not coordinated, and then they told us that it was, they meaning the Iranians and Hezbollah, told us it's not going to be coordinated. Each entity is going to carry out retribution against Israel on its own time and in its own way. But anyway, it was this very big wind-up, and Nasrallah even told us that that part of the punishment of the Israelis was the big long windup, because they had to go on alert all the time. So what I think happened is the Israelis said, to hell with it. We're going to go take some preemptive action, and we are going to go, it's going to be a show of capabilities, and we are going to take out a significant amount of infrastructure. But we are going to do our best to kill a minimal number of people. But we're going to do this preemptively, and we're going to say it was in response to Hezbollah's preparations, which were going on, actually. There was some kind of preparation going on.
But not the imminence that the Israelis would lead you to believe.
Not the imminent one that we were led to believe. Because you have this problem. You got 100 aircraft. You got 100 aircraft in the air. The largest strike that Israel has made against Lebanon since Hezbollah, since the beginning of the war. You've got rockets, you've got these aircraft shooting off ordnance in real time, according to real-time intelligence, and about 5 Hezbollah guys died. I don't know what the exact number was. I couldn't tell. It was 5 or 7. It was a very small loss of life from this massive, what looked like a massive preemptive operation, and it just doesn't add up to me. I don't see how that that small loss of life
Interesting.
can result from that big of an operation.
But it did reach the Israeli objective. I understand what you're saying, which was, hey, we can't sit here day after day waiting for the counter, right? The attack from Lebanon, the attack from Iran, whatever. So we're just going to do this now. Then what followed, of course, was a significant response from Hezbollah. But even that one seemed to be a pinprick, and each side seemed to kind of walk away saying we got what we wanted.
Yeah, what Hezbollah said was that Nasrallah gave a speech, and he said the Israelis are liars. We did launch a major preemptive strike.
Right.
Right. We did. We fooled them. They were incapable of suppressing our fire, unlike what they said. We got off everything that we wanted to get off, and we achieved all the objectives that we wanted to achieve. So, in a sense, the Israelis, if this is what happened, it's kind of brilliant psychology.
Yes.
They made it seem like something much that Hezbollah was up to something much bigger than it was, which allowed Hezbollah to climb off of the escalation ladder that it was climbing up. That's what I think happened. You know,
fascinating.
It bears in my mind. It is a much more the event is much more similar. I feel like my English is failing me here.
We'll accept that formulation.
It's much more similar to the exchange with the Iranians back in April than it might seem. Remember what happened? The Iranians sent that massive barrage against the Israelis. Sure. And what did the Israelis do? They responded. They were under pressure from the Americans not to escalate, but they couldn't let it go by without doing anything. So they took a series of actions, some of which didn't get very well reported at all, that were very low signature actions, but low signature, high impact, designed to have an impact on the leadership.
So, Mike, we're talking about the April 14 attack from Iran into Israel, and then Israel's subsequent response where they penetrated into Iranian space, seemingly in a fashion that the Iranians didn't know about, in a sensitive area where they had their nuclear weapons program nearby. Seemed significant message sending, right?
Yeah, they took out a surface-to-air missile system next to the Natanz nuclear facility. So what they did is they showed, look, we have a capability. We have some very serious capabilities, and we can come in and we can hit you in your most sensitive area, and you don't even know where it's coming from. And that it was a show of capability designed to de-escalate. It's like Roger, you're in a bar and you've had a few too many to drink, and you start poking a big guy in his chest. And he doesn't really want to fight you. He's stronger than you, or as strong as you, and he just gives you a little slap. Just a little slap, and it's not designed to really hurt you, even really to humiliate you greatly, but it's just to say, I'm not going to take much more of this from you, and I want you to know I have the ability to do this.
That seems to be the Israeli posture as it relates to Iran, and here I want to pivot to Iran in just a moment. Overall, since April, so we mentioned the strike near Natanz, which you've just been talking about. So that would be the bar scene you've just described is one example. That was one slap. But then there was a second slap across the face to continue in the Mike Doran teaching tool for Israel-Iran policy with the killing of Hania, that is Hamas's political leader, who was in Tehran.
Yeah, that was also the same kind of message. They went to extraordinary effort not to kill any Iranians. They killed Hania and his bodyguard, who was, if you listen to the Iranian or to the official stories, he was standing outside the door of Hania. I prefer to think that he was in bed with Hania, but that's just that's just my embellishment. You know,
Okay.
that's
The
how I
Hollywood
wanna-
embellishment right there.
That's my Hollywood embellishment. But at any rate, it was not a Iranian, and so. And they were very careful not to do that. They didn't shoot. They didn't shoot from a drone into the window or anything else because
Right.
they didn't want to blow up too many people. It's the same kind of thing. A little slap across the face, but in this case, really humiliating because it was in a presidential complex. You know, they were gassing.
Unbelievable. I mean, reach and the ability to demonstrate what could be done if they didn't stand down. Let's stick with Iran for a moment, and let's talk about the presidential election here in the United States. President Trump v. Vice President Kamala Harris. You know, we look at these two candidates, and particularly if you're trying to discern what their foreign policy and national security policy may be, there aren't many clear differences that jump out at you because there's so little discussion of policy. President Trump has 20 bullet points. Harris has none that I'm aware of. Of course, the assumption is she will follow the Biden administration. But one area that would be a huge policy difference, and I'd love for you to comment on this, and then we could talk about Vice President Harris's recent interview, the one she's done on CNN with Dana Bash. But the one major difference is Iran. President Trump is very clear and celebrates the impact of the maximum pressure campaign applied during his presidency. And of course, Vice President Harris is associated with President Biden's policy of striving to return to the days of the JCPOA, that is, the Obama era deal with Iran, and have come short of it, mostly because Iran is not interested in it, despite the Biden administration's efforts. But talk about that difference and what we could expect to see and how things would change just on the Iran policy alone.
Well, I think that Kamala Harris is on Iran is going to continue what I see as the Obama-Biden policy. There's a debate among here in Washington about among those of us who are following the Middle East closely, is Biden's policy really the same as Obama's? And I think it's identical. But there is an argument by serious people who say no, there's actually some significant differences. Anyway, Kamala Harris is going to at least be the same as Biden. If you're inclined to see Obama as more conciliatory toward Iran, more of an appeaser, then there's a very good chance that she'll be in the Obama mold as you understand it. Like I said, I think the Obama-Biden mold is the same thing, and right. I expect to see the same thing from Kamala. Her major advisor on these issues, Phil Gordon, is more Obama-like than Obama himself. All of these
Tell us what that means. More Obama-like than Obama himself. Explain that one.
They believe a few key things. They believe that the way forward with Iran is by diplomacy rather than pressure. Not that, whether it's economic pressure or military pressure. For them, it's the same thing, because economic pressure leads to military escalation, which it all takes you down the same road. They believe that it's strategically important to constrain Israel, because in their worldview, they don't say it this way, but it's really pretty clear if you follow everything they say and do. They believe that Israel acts as a kind of catapult that throws the United States at Iran in ways that are not in the American interest. And
yeah, I've read you on this point before. I think it's a very astute insight into the major differences that play out between Democrats and Republicans, particularly the Obama-Biden administrations as it relates to Iran than Trump. And I think conservatives, Republicans writ large, that their view of Israel and how it impacts U.S. policy is the driver of the Iran policy. It's
totally. Roger, I guarantee you, and I would bet a lot on this, that on October 7th, on October 7th itself, when they got together and talked, when I say they, I'm talking about the senior most advisors on the Biden team, and they talked about who all were on the Obama team. When they got together and they talked about what was happening, the attacks by Hamas out of Gaza, their first reaction was, oh no, this is going to strengthen the Israeli right. And this is going to strengthen the call to get tough on Iran, because Hamas is armed, trained, equipped, and financed by Iran. And we have to do everything we can, one, to wall off the Iran question from the Gaza question, and number two, we have to do everything we can to prevent the Israeli right from benefiting politically from this event.
That may be the case. We'll wait for the memoirs to come out. It is shocking, Mike, that with everything that's transpired since October 7th, the Biden administration has not shifted 1 inch, 1 iota of its Iran policy. It's in their mind, everything that's happened since October 7th, and with we've just discussed with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and what we haven't discussed, but we've talked about separately with the Houthis in the Red Sea and coming out of Yemen, it is divorced. It is as if you wouldn't know that these are the Iranian proxies. It just doesn't matter. It is. Right. It continues to be shocking. I mean, obviously, your view is that it's almost ideological on the part of the Biden administration.
I believe it's the foundation of their worldview, and I think that they have developed talking points like Kamala Harris used in the Dana Bash interview, like she used in the DNC. You know, I want. Roger, I want to be clear. I want to be very clear.
Now, I want to be clear. Right, I want to be clear. This is your Harris impersonation right now, Vice President Harris. All right, you want to be clear? Go on.
I want to be clear. Israel has a right to defend itself. I want to be very clear about this. It has a right to defend itself. This is the way they do. It's a straddle. They stand before pro-Israel audiences, and they say Israel has a right to defend itself. And my support for Israel's security is ironclad. It's ironclad, Roger. And then they pivot and they say, but the war has to end. We have to bring the war to an end. Too many Gazan civilians are dying. And they have this other rhetoric about we need to have a revitalized two-state solution with the Palestinian Authority in charge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's nonsense, because if the war ends right now, Hamas comes back like weeds after a summer rain, right? So there's no serious explanation as to how we stop the war now and yet remove Hamas somehow.
Well, right, defeating it. Israel has a right to defend itself, but as you've pointed out elsewhere, but not to defeat Hamas, and certainly allowing Israel to carry out its war aims. The United States has important points of leverage with the security assistance. You mentioned before that has had been a pressure point by the Biden administration that has impacted Israel decision making and its ability to prosecute the war. But for the most part, Prime Minister Netanyahu, regardless of that pressure, has been able to prosecute the war. My sense is in the fashion that he's wanted.
I don't know that it's the fashion that he's wanted. I think they've had to make enormous concessions to the Americans in ways that have prolonged the war, in ways that have given Hamas safe havens within Gaza.
Certainly, the negotiations over Rafah and getting the Americans comfortable sharing the plans and really the timepiece, not being able to operate, because the pauses in coordination.
Yeah, but also there are lots of areas in which the Israelis haven't maneuvered in Gaza.
Let me ask you to flip it, and if we see President Trump elect in November, no doubt you agree, and we see a dramatic change on the Iran file. What are the first things you'd expect to happen?
I think that Trump is going to. I think it's best to understand Trump's policy, not so much in contrast to Kamala, but in terms of the debate that's going to go on his team. His team is going to be if you look at all the top individuals, they're going to be there's going to be a predilection to support Israel. They're going to be supportive of Israel, and they're going to be hostile to Iran, much more, on a kind of gut level.
Yeah.
But in terms of the policy that they're going to arrive at, they have in the Trump world, you have a growing body of opinion, restraintist opinion, which comes out in a very similar place to where Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and others are. They're
You're talking about the conservative restrainers, which obviously J.D. Vance is a part of, or the vice presidential nominee.
Right, although Vance is very sound on Israel, but
right.
The conservative restrainers, and so Trump is going to straddle that inclination on his team to be more. He's definitely going to be a baseline more hostile to Iran, more sympathetic to Israel, no doubt about it. But that is going to be tempered by the need to straddle with the conservative restrainers, and so that's where the debate is going to be, and exactly where that's going to come out, I don't know.
Could you imagine for us for a minute, Mike? What a tangible example of where you would see that chasm between the conservative restrainers and, for lack of a better word, the Iran hawks in President Trump's orbit?
Well,
a sanctions debate, support for Israel and a strike.
Number one, there will be the debate about whether to go back to maximum pressure immediately or not. Just like there wasn't, we've seen this movie before. In the first Trump administration, for the first 2 years, or nearly 2 years, Trump was trying to negotiate with Congress, and then trying to negotiate with the Europeans, and then and the Iranians were just running out the clock. We had maximum pressure on Iran only for about 18 months. So there'll be the question about whether to rush back to maximum pressure or not, and there will be arguments against it. Some of them will be political, domestic. I mean, there'll be a domestic political concern. Some of it will be prudential. The world has changed since Trump was in office, and the Iranians are a lot closer to a nuclear weapon now. The balance of power globally has shifted. The military is going to be concerned about the balance with China and. Look at all these aircraft aircraft carriers that have gone to the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean since October 7th. I'm sure that there are elements in the military that are saying, "Hey, we don't have the assets in place in the South China Sea that we need," and so on. So there'll be a debate. There'll be a debate.
We're with Michael Doran, who is the Senior Fellow and Director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at the Hudson Institute. Great conversation, really thoughtful insights on the situation in the Middle East, the Israel-Hamas war, policy towards Iran. We're going to wrap up with our lightning round. Mike, here's where we ask our guests to share their favorite Reagan speech, book, or quote. Pull back your historian cap here for a second and share with us what you got.
So my favorite Reagan speech is the Boys of Pointe du Hoc. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
You don't have to be a French speaker here. That works.
I mean, I think it's a model. By the way, did you see that Biden plagiarized from it or copied
sure.
it?
That was on the anniversary of D-Day. Of course, it was 40 years after Reagan's speech, 80 years after the Normandy landing on the beaches. Yeah, and very similar.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe they did that because it's such an iconic speech. But I mean, I haven't watched it in a long time, but you can pull it up on YouTube, and it brings a tear to my eyes. I mean, it is just a spectacular speech, spectacularly performed.
Yeah.
Performed. Yeah. I can't speak English for some reason. Just really, I mean, but anybody who wants to be a politician, I mean, it should be something that they should study. The staging of it, the performance, all of it was just amazing. I have another favorite one, which is more related to the Middle East, but it's less complimentary to Reagan. But in a
we,
way,
we might have to mute you out. We'll let you go. We'll see.
I remember when I was an undergraduate, Reagan gave a speech in '86, I believe it was, in the context of or it was an address, a primetime address to the nation in '86 in response to the Iran-Contra affair and the Tower report. And it's amazing, and I think about it a lot because my view of the speech or the statement at the time and my view today have changed so radically. Because he came on, I don't know if you remember this, and he said, my fellow Americans, I told you a few months ago that I did not trade arms for hostages. He said, but we've studied the matter here now, and I'm here to tell you that although my heart and my best intentions continue to tell me that I didn't do this, I have to come clean to you and tell you that I did it. And I remember when I was a kid watching that, I thought, what a load of nonsense. The president, how could the president not know that he did it? But now I'm older and I'm wiser. I've worked in government, and I'm also personally more humble, And I know that I have done things that I didn't intend to do or didn't think that I lacked self-awareness at certain moments. So both on a personal level and on a political level, I can totally understand how one does this. And I've studied that whole episode, and I think Reagan was actually remarkably candid and honest with the American people in that speech. Although it's an unfortunate episode, I think it says wonderful things.
There's a lesson to be learned for sure. I mean, Mike, you are the first to raise that speech in the context of a lightning round. May not be a surprise to you, but it does reflect a element of President Reagan's approach to the office, which was he consistently went directly to the American people and had this almost direct engagement with them. In the days before social media and the like, He would be going on TV and talking to American people and leveling with them. And this one, of course, was a difficult one, but it kind of seen through that light, it really matches up with your reflections there. Mike Doran, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Reaganism. New episodes premiere weekly every Monday on YouTube and all podcast streaming platforms. If you like this episode, be sure to let us know and share with a friend.